Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk to you guys and give you guys a brief introduction of autism. This is the first video of chapter 11, where I'm going to introduce you all to basically what is autism, and other childhood disorders. So this chapter in Brain Facts is simultaneously my favorite and least favorite chapters. My favorite because you learn a lot about how the brain works and how even small genetic modifications can have massive ramifications in the process of how your body is created and how that implicates later on in life. However, the reason it's my least favorite is because of this box right here. Every chapter has around 10 to 15 statistics that for some reason are extremely tested on Brain B regional rounds, especially for the final few rounds as tiebreakers. So it's really helpful to memorize some of these stats box ideas. So the format for this video and all videos after, because unfortunately all chapters have numerous statistics, is I'm going to start off with the stats box, explain the statistics, and give you guys some hints to memorize it, and then get into some actual content of the video. All right, let's get started. So the first stat is that 40 people with autism have above average intelligence. So a really common misconception is that people with autism have low IQ and that they aren't able to really think for themselves. This is not true because at least 40% have above average intelligence. One thing I also want to mention is that these stats were written in 2018. It's likely that these have changed, but unfortunately, the regional questions just don't change. They tend to get reused or are just written off the book. So maybe these stats have changed, but for now, this is what you should know. Okay, so 40% have above average intelligence. So this kind of debunks the myth that people with autism aren't intelligent or can't think like people who don't have autism. That's not true. In fact, that's not even a diagnostic criteria for autism, as we'll talk about later. Second thing is that 1 in 68 American 8-year-olds likely have autism. So, well, there's not really much to explain here. All I'd say is that 68 is a really odd number, which makes it really easy to remember. So 1 in 68 American 8-year-olds, 8 and 8, that's how I remember it. Now, for some reason, the pattern behind this is not understood. Pattern not understood, but 4 to 5 times boys are 4 to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls. So it tends to be more that boys are diagnosed with autism than girls. So these two stats together are actually really important because since the 1970s, the number of diagnoses have recently shot up for autism. Now, the reason for this is that scientists believe that diagnostic criteria have changed. No, Gnostic criteria change. So because the diagnostic criteria has become more specific and more open-ended, I guess you could say. Not open-ended, more specific. It's become a little bit easier and more resources have come for autism. Um, because parents now have more resource access to about autism, they're able to diagnose it more. And furthermore, it's also might be that the environment has probably changed a little bit, so some environmental effects. But yeah, so that's basically the main reason behind these stats, why they included that. Okay, so these two stats are trying to leeway into the genetics of autism, all right? Genetics is believed to be a main driver of autism and how it's passed down. And the reason scientists are able to say that with somewhat of certainty is because of twin studies. If one twin is diagnosed with autism, there's a higher than 50% chance that the other twin gets diagnosed too. So showing that twins who have identical DNA are showing pretty consistent um, expression and pretty consistent expression, or the phenotype is coming over and over again, we can see that there probably is like a genetic mechanism behind it. Oh, I don't think I finished writing this. That's okay. I can write it out. So for older siblings, if you have an older sibling that has autism, the younger sibling has a 1 in 5 chance of also being diagnosed. So there are some genes that scientists have been able to identify as markers for autism. However, we'll get into that in the next video. I just want to talk a little bit about what autism is in the first place and the diagnostic criteria for it. So there's a lot of misconceptions around what autism is why it's um and why it's kind of stigmatized, unfortunately. But the two main diagnostic criteria are, let me change my color, is one, that they have impaired social skills, social and communication skills, right? So this can be in the form of not wanting to play with their peers, resisting eye contact, or just being kind of standoffish, I've heard some people say, and I've definitely heard the eye contact one a lot. Another, some of the phenotypes can include not wanting to play with their group mates. That's a really common behavior at around age 4 to 5, I believe. Socializing with their peers, they don't want to do that. They tend to pull away, which is tends to be the age where autism gets diagnosed because in a group setting, they inspect how the child is behaving. Another one, the second diagnostic criteria is narrow, obsessive interest. So this can be in the form of only wanting to play with a specific toy, not wanting to explore. Um, one of my close friends in childhood, she has autism. She has autism, and her favorite toy to do was only to build blocks. She wouldn't want to do anything else except to play with those blocks. So those narrow and obsessive kind of interests, and this actually is a really interesting criteria because it introduces you to the idea of savant syndrome. So, savant syndrome, if you guys have watched The Good Doctor, it's a medical show with a doctor who has autism, who also has savant syndrome, is where usually found in people with autism. And it's a syndrome where they're really good in one field. So extreme talent or extreme aptitude, I should say aptitude in one field. Often this demonstrates itself in art or music. That's a lot of people's strength. I also know that in the case of the good doctor medicine, he's really good at visualizing the body and kind of making those connections. And I think another one could also possibly be math. I've seen math a lot. They really some students with autism have are really talented at math. So these aren't the only diagnostic criteria. The DSM-5 is actually the most commonly accredited diagnostic manual, which has more specific diagnostic criteria. But these are the two criteria that BrainFacts mentions, and thus you should focus on for the context of preparing for your competition. So that is autism. Notice how none of their diagnostic criteria say anything about intellect at all. They don't say that they have to have under IQ, an IQ of under a certain threshold. No, that is not a diagnostic criteria for autism. So please make sure you're debunking that if you ever hear anything like that. Students with autism just have barriers in communication and maybe some compulsive interests, but that doesn't make them dumber or any less competent than a person without autism. Sure, they may have some difficulties, but that does not mean that they are any less competent in whatever you need them to do. So please make sure that you are learning about this, but also spreading awareness about these conditions because it really helps in incorporating and integrating students with autism. And usually, ignorance is the result of misinformation. So, making sure that you are debunking, spreading, and bringing awareness and accommodating as much as possible. And the best way to do all of that is to be informed yourself. So, I hope that helped. And if you have any questions, as always, please leave a comment down below or email me at stemwme@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your help. Bye, everyone.